Good morning to you all. I'm Karen Mercer and Master of the Worship Company of Farmers. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to our third question time. During my year in office, my theme is the future of the family farm. And for today's question time, I wanted to ask, how can the family farm engage with and adapt to the new agriculture? Whether you call it new agriculture or not, there is no doubt that agriculture today is facing more change than it has for generations. Of course, it's not the first time. It was only 100 years ago that there was a great debate about whether tractors would be able to replace horsepower on the farms. My goodness, just look at how technology has advanced since those days. Then the challenges of feeding the population during World War II. This forced a massive upheaval as thousands of acres of grassland were ploughed up. Another great change hit us in 1973 when we joined the common market, the mirror image of what is in play now as we chart a course for UK agriculture out of the EU. How can farmers best navigate the road ahead as single farm payment comes to an end and ELMS is introduced? If in the future the driver is going to be public money for public goods, what will that actually look like? Pressure to be carbon neutral, cutting emissions, reducing air miles, the changing social attitude towards farming, the post-Brexit international trading environment. There are so many unknowns and so many questions. How can the family farm best equip themselves to make the right decisions for themselves, their business, and their communities? As they always have, farmers will rise to the challenge as they navigate their way through this minefield. But I hope that everyone from government to social influencers will come to recognise and remember that the farmer needs to have a business that is profitable and sustainable to be able to feed the country and to be good custodians of the land. I approached Professor Stephen Ramsden of Nottingham University for his views. His expertise is in rural business management, agricultural policy, and modelling farmer adaptation to environmental change. Stephen will present his findings of his research into the topic. We have an excellent panel who need very little introduction. Caroline Drummond has led LEAF since it was set up in 1991. The work of LEAF focuses on encouraging more sustainable farming practices that are prosperous, enriches the environment, and engages local communities, which helps build better public understanding of farming. John Renner, a Northumberland leaf farmer. The farm extends to over 200 hectares, focusing on beef and sheep. The Renner family farms by combining environmental care with sound practical farming that runs throughout the business. Soil management and fertility is managed very carefully with management techniques tailored to individual fields and rotations. Non-inversion tillage techniques are used wherever possible to maintain soil structure. Mark Bridgman, who has recently stepped down as president of the CLA. Mark has been involved with the CLA for over 14 years. There are 28,000 members in the organisation who own or manage over half the rural land in England and Wales between them. The CLA has in-house and national advisors who can offer members a wealth of knowledge, expertise and impartial advice for all areas of land ownership. George Dunn, Chief Executive of the Tenant Farmers Association. Today, the TFA is the only organisation dedicated to supporting all farmers who do not own the land that they operate, from the traditional tenant farmers to varying contract arrangements. Members of the TFA are drawn from right across the spectrum of the farming industry. Their farms range from the smallest county council holding to units of several thousand acres. Both the CLA and TFA lobby government on behalf of their members. The panel today will give you their thoughts on Stephen's presentation and topics he has covered, after which the session will be open to questions and answers. The question time is intended to be interactive, but I encourage you all to ask the questions of the panel. Please do this through the chat function, which after the past 2 years, I'm sure you're all familiar with. I'd now like to hand over to Stephen to present his findings. Thank you.
Good morning for those of you who are in this part of the world. My name's Stephen Ramsden and I'm going to talk for 13 minutes or so about the topic of the day, and that is how can the family farm engage and adapt to the new agriculture. I'm a lecturer in farm management and the product of a family farm in North Yorkshire. So this is based on some work that's based on 3 sources. Firstly, a literature review looking specifically at how what we do on farms has an effect on the environment. Secondly, a questionnaire that some farmers, I'm not sure if there's anyone who participated with us today, but a questionnaire conducted in early summer this year, and then available documentation, primarily DEFRA, and what I talk about really relates to the England situation, although I think there is a broader context on the family farm more widely. So, if I can get my slides to respond. Okay, so what is the new agriculture? So firstly, very broadly, farming that benefits the environment. The idea in the UK, through things like the Sustainable Farming Incentive, public payments for public goods, and we'll have a look at that in a later slide. I think there are 3 keys to engagement. Firstly, recognizing where you are, particularly financially. Secondly, recognizing that family farms are businesses and that we need to think with a business mindset. And then a further element of the new agriculture, which I think is also important for engagement, and that is that we all need, and it's not just family farms, but we all need better knowledge of how things that we do on farm affect outcomes that are of interest, both production outcomes and environmental outcomes. So I'm sort of trying to capture that through the phrase agri-environmental interactions. And it's something I've been involved with over a long period through my research. So what is a family farm? A lot of sort of discussion and thoughts about this. This is a very broad and deliberately broad definition. Family farms are businesses that involve family members, where family members draw to some extent on business profitability, and clearly there needs to be a profit for that to take place. So you could have all sorts of other definitions that are a certain size or a certain business organization. We've rejected that because it's important that farms remain adaptable. So that frees us up to think about different forms of business organization. And I just listed some of them on the right-hand side there. The point is that you could be engaged in any of those forms of business organization or in a current form of business organization and shift to, for example, a contract farming agreement or a share farming type of arrangement. And it's important that we retain that flexibility. So the main challenge for family farms from an England and UK perspective is that you've got 3 things essentially. You're operating over a relatively large area from an EU perspective, not compared to an Australian perspective, with a small number of people with an inadequate amount of profitability to cover family needs, but also the risk involved. So combine these and we've got a major threat to succession. So just having a look at the financial situation, this is the Farm Business Survey. I've got information for 2018-2019. This is across all farm types for England, and you've got different components there, but the agriculture component pretty much breaking even. Note that your agri-environment and your diversified income is positive, so these are fully costed out, but that the major component of farm business income is the basic payment. And we know that in the UK, the basic payment is coming down, and so farmers cannot rely on that in the future. That will be substituted for the new environmental land management payments through things like the Sustainable Farming Incentive. So the current situation is not a particularly satisfactory one for the average farm, and I emphasize that these are averages, but it's also going to deteriorate with the reduction in the basic payment. So we need to recognize that situation. It's a currently unsatisfactory situation from a financial perspective, and is going to deteriorate. So this idea of private goods and public goods, and the first thing I wanted to say was, let's not forget about the private goods, the food, particularly over the last 2 years. And farmers are able to provide food because there's an effective market. There are market imperfections, and there's no time to go into that now, but we do have a system that, without intervention from outside, provides incentives for farmers to provide, for example, wheat for the bread that we eat, or that we expect to be available in the supermarket every morning. And we shouldn't forget the importance of that side of what farming does. The idea with the new agricultural policy in the UK is that we will have payments for public goods, and the problem here is there isn't a proper market signal, there's less incentive to respond, and we get less public goods. We get less environmental provision than is ideal. From an economic perspective, we have a suboptimal supply of environmental services and goods. There is a research side on both of these. On the environmental side, research is tending to show up the problems to do with nutrient loss or climate change and so forth. Now, I would like to sort of think from a family farm perspective that the major opportunity here is to think of this as though your market has grown, and indeed it has grown. You were a provider of a very important thing, and that is food. You are now a provider of a very important thing, and that is environmental public goods. And so thinking of it as a market opportunity, I think, is one way that family farms can engage in the new agriculture. One thing we put an emphasis on is that the lack of knowledge on the environmental side in relation to conventional agriculture. So on the right-hand side, this is actually data from Sutton Bonington, University of Nottingham, and we have lots of information across research centres across the world on the relationship between nitrogen and yield. We've been looking at this for over 100 years, and so there's a body of evidence. We do have information on things like the effect of cover crops on yield and desirable environmental outcomes, like reducing nitrate loss, but we don't have the level of information and knowledge that we have on conventional agriculture. So we need to reduce uncertainty. If people are to engage with a form of agriculture, it needs to be less uncertain. And one way of reducing that uncertainty is to have a better knowledge base. And that's partly about family farmers adopting the knowledge, but also about researchers providing better knowledge for decision-making involving the environment. We should not reinvent the wheel. It's a sort of fairly obvious thing to say, but I think it's very important. There are lots of bodies involved in providing information relating to agri-environment. Some of these representatives from these bodies are with us today. I'll just pick out one, Rothamsted Research, and I just wanted to make a point in relation to knowledge and its availability. Increasingly, knowledge is what's called open access, and this is a big talking point in universities, but from a user perspective, it means that you have access to information that only I had maybe 5 or 10 years ago. I think I'd like to talk a lot about this paper. I think this is a very interesting paper looking at straw management and yield stability, but my point is that if you are interested in production and environmental aspects of straw management and yield, then you have access to that type of information. It's free to share, to download through open access. It's not just about sort of biodiversity and wildlife and so forth. Farms are high technology centres, and technology is part of the new agriculture. So we have pictures here, again, from University of Nottingham, the dairy centre. On the right, you have an uncovered slurry tank. On the left, you have a covered slurry lagoon, a very sort of basic form of technology. But you are reducing losses in the form of ammonia, nitrous oxide, and methane on the left-hand side, whereas the open tank, those are being emitted to air. There are capital grants for installing such things, or there have been availability of capital grants. And also, this is a little bit of a stretch, but the general principle holds, I think. You've also got an increase in productivity. You're capturing more of the nutrients in the farm system, nitrogen in particular, that then is potentially available for productive uses rather than being lost to the environment. I said that family farms should think of themselves as businesses, and I apologize for the diagram on the right. That's a third-year undergraduate farm management lecture diagram, but I think we should return to fundamentals. And it's not just about profitability, although that's important. It's also about a business mindset. So just to pick one aspect of that, what are your objectives over the next 5 to 10 years? What do you want to achieve? What does the farm family wish to achieve over the next 5 to 10 years, and how can the new agriculture help with that? I think it's very important that you see yourself as being in control of meeting your own objectives and consider the different options that are available, things like the payments under the Sustainable Farming Incentive, within that business mindset. And I think we have a part to play here. Too often education and research are what I would call production focused. And the simplest way I can explain that is in terms of agricultural degrees, which are the wrong way around. You start with production and then think about, well, we produce something, what are we going to do with it? And that is the wrong way around. We should start with the business management in the first year of the programs. There are lots of opportunities. Again, I've just listed some of them out on the right-hand side. These are actually taken from the 25-year environment plan for the UK. I put some of them in green, and the picture there is, again, something that's been in development at University of Nottingham. H2OD is a small-scale anaerobic digestion plant. And the potential environmental benefits there are better air and water quality, mitigation of climate change through reduced methane emissions, but also a source of income through biogas, bioenergy. So if you hook that up to a combined heat and power unit, then you've got a source of renewable energy. So there are also what I'm calling win-wins. There are things that you can do that have productive benefits on farm, things like building up soil organic carbon, reduction in waste and reducing costs, and then a whole array of things that I haven't really got time to talk about, but in terms of the marketing opportunities from the new agriculture, there's scope there for controlling prices, for adding value by providing more information, among other things, so that consumers are better informed about the products that they're consuming. So a business mindset is important, and I mentioned succession, and that viability is important, profitability is important for succession. But I think we need to be better at differentiating what it is to be involved in agriculture. There are different roles. I've listed them out there as physical, technical, management, marketing, environmental, but there are shades across those different definitions. There are lots of individual things within, for example, technical. Data management, for example, increasingly important. I would argue, but then I'm a farm management person, that we undervalue the role of management, and we should make it clearer what things young people in particular, younger family members, but also those from outside of agriculture, what sort of things they can be involved with. So I think management is important, but I wouldn't want to underestimate the physical and particularly the technical, and again, I will use the example of data management, opportunities that there are in agriculture, and that this is a way, along with improved profitability, to help with issues relating to succession in the business. I think this is a particularly exciting area. So it's not just about payments from government, it's also about new markets. So I've got a couple of examples here. Forest carbon brings in money from people who wish to, or companies that wish to offset carbon emissions. And so funding comes into farms, and farmers capture and store carbon, most obviously through planting and management of woodland and forest. Entrade is a platform, a market platform that's been engaged in providing or facilitating is a better word, a range of environmental services, water quality improvement. The key thing here is that largely farmers have been paid for management actions. So, for example, grow cover crops. So it's something over which you have control. It's not payment by results, which are less controllable. And therefore, by having that control, it should be more attractive than perhaps more sort of radical forms of environmental payment where you're being paid for results. Personally speaking, I think we're missing a trick. I think payment by results and embracing the uncertainty of that is an opportunity, but maybe we could leave that for the questions. If you are to be engaged in these new markets, it is important, particularly with platforms like Entrade, that you know your costs of production. You're bidding to provide an environmental service. You need to know how much it costs to provide that environmental service. So this is my final slide, 4 take-home points. Firstly, we need to see the family farm more as a business, and that's not just about profitability, that's about the business mindset and thinking about your goals and your family goals. The new agriculture, I think, is not best thought of, but one way that it can be thought of that's very helpful is that it expands your market opportunities considerably. I think we need better knowledge, we need better research and understanding of how what we do on farm affects environmental outcomes, things like greenhouse gas emissions. How much are we actually reducing emissions by a particular management action, for example? And then think about your family goals and think about succession and think about perhaps using something like the management cycle. Go back to your old college notes about how the new agriculture can achieve these. So that's just sort of an introduction to today's topic. I think, and Duncan will correct me if I'm wrong, I will now stop sharing and introduce Caroline Drummond, who is Chief Executive of LEAF. I mentioned LEAF on one of my slides, and Caroline is in a much better position to give you the views of LEAF as an organisation. So I'll hand over to Caroline.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen, and thank you for inviting me to be on the panel and just make a few quick observations. So Stephen's research has obviously clearly identified many of the challenges and how we really make it work, because we've got to make it work as a farming industry. We've kind of got 9 years to sort all of this out in terms of addressing climate change, etc. But of course, we have ever-changing demands of farming, which have been very clearly highlighted. On Monday, we wanted quantity. Tuesday, we wanted quantity and quality. Wednesday, quantity, quality, cheapness. Thursday, safe food, quantity, quality, cheapness. And by Friday, we, of course, want animal welfare, safeness, cheapness, quantity, quality. Come Saturday, we want environment and biodiversity in there. Sunday, carbon footprinting. Every single day, we want something more in terms of our delivery of farming. And therein lies some of the challenges. And for family farms, as been highlighted, actually the structures of family farms are ever changing. They do range from small, very traditional type approaches to actually, in effect, some very large estates, which are to all intents and purposes family farms. And that can be really beneficial to some smaller businesses who may be feeding in there, as, say, for example, with the fresh produce sector, where a carrot farmer or a cabbage farmer or something like that says, actually, I don't want the specialisms required in marketing or in agronomy, but I do want to grow. And so let's embrace some of these changing infrastructures. Stephen has identified research and the importance of the research and a number of priorities, but these are not exclusive to family farms. The big changes ahead are for all. And I think, you know, succession is a challenge. And I also, one of my biggest fears is beware of history lessons. We need to be very careful we don't frame the future in the past. And that's, you know, that's certainly not something that Stephen's alluded to, but the changes of the future are very different. We are seeing crop physiology changes. We are seeing, of course, new market opportunities. And we have to have the capability to mitigate to climate change. Farmers used to deal in weather, now they do deal face to, you know, climate change, and that is a very big challenge. But there's some opportunities there. I love the film, The Fiddler on the Roof, where tradition is obviously a very core part. And it was that whole area. It's all about embracing change. And as we do that, you'll see that Johnny and I have both got our integrated farm management approach, but that the importance of building, and this is where family farms are really good, that pride, that knowledge, that inherent understanding of soil, but mixing that with new innovation and technology. And we will be seeing, you know, for farmers, that ultimate circus skills on the tightrope of change, kind of flying through by the seat of your pants often. But in addition to that, that juggling the many requirements that are there from a day to day. The government support mechanisms have acted as a buffer for supporting affordable food, as well, of course, some public goods. And the new approach is going to be different. But we must not see farming and farms as a social service. And as Stephen has really emphasized, you know, they are businesses. And it is really important to be in control of the things that you are in control of. Setting that vision, setting those objectives in terms of what you can achieve within your own powers. Future public goods are going to be important, and there will be new other streams, carbon, and what Steve has mentioned is around health, the importance of actually farmers being center stage in improved nutrition and health, the environment, and of course, to the core of all this, our capability to produce safe food. And the more I look at some of the global challenges, safety is a really big challenge of something that we often take for granted. So let's pull back value to farmers and embrace some of these changes. Thank you. And can I now pass on to you, John Renner, who is a leaf demonstration farmer up in Northumberland.
Hi, good morning to all. I think I've been put in to be a little bit of an example of a test case. That's where I'm coming from. My knowledge is, you know, Caroline far exceeds me of all knowledge of interaction with this sort of thing. So I'm going to tell a wee story about how we've gone around. Now we're a very small business. I met my wife, Helen, at Harper Adams, and we've just been driven to do farming. And in 1997, we got our tenancy. Very small farm, and we were struggling very hard. And someone nudged me, and coincidentally, I did a Worship Accompanying Farmers course in 2003. I couldn't see what the benefits were at the beginning, but after 3 weeks of a very intensive course, I came out absolutely steaming, furious, mad. Agriculture wasn't marketing itself. It wasn't a business. It wasn't set up for the purpose of what was coming along, i.e. working with the environment and other bits and bobs. So Helen and I instantly changed what we were doing. We started with the first thing we did, I don't know if Caroline knew this, but the first thing we did was joined LEAF, because it was the only group nationally that interacted with the public. And it was a way of marketing what we did, great food production, and tell the public how good it was. And from there, I'll have to look at my notes all of a sudden. And from there, we changed banks in 2004. And by 2006, we changed the business so much that we bought the farm. With no money. That was the very clever point. But we've absolutely stuck and used integrated farm management. I pointed behind me there because that's our little wheel. And if you don't know what the wheel is, look it up and have a real look at how a structure for a business. We use budgets and cash flows, and cost control absolutely dominates our decisions. We keep on saying if we can't measure it, we can't control it. And we do that in every aspect of what we do. Cost of production is always key, bringing down that cost of production. Look at the worst case scenario at the market and make sure you're producing below that cost of production. Becoming sustainable, that's been a massive thing. So since 2004, we have just worked so hard and keep on asking ourselves questions and beating ourselves up about how to get the right answers. And it doesn't always fit in beautifully with what you want to do, but you make it fit, and you make it fit to the best of your endeavors. Using science and technical data to reduce costs of production. We've got a beef suckler cow unit, and we've got a herd, sorry, and we've got a sheep flock, and we absolutely use all sorts of science. We work very, very closely with our vets, and we use estimated breed values for breeding. It's all about ease of calving. It's all about great 400-day weights, and it's bringing down our cost of production all the time. 7 years ago, we reviewed our business completely. We were preparing specifically for the removal and the change of BPS. That's what we looked at. We were looking at this 7 years ago. And we looked at the 9 income streams on the farm, and we just said, which ones are propping up what bits? And we took the bottom one out completely and said, right, we're going to sell the arable land. That's how we went about it. And we bought another farm that was more grass, more suitable for what we wanted to do, where we could make more money. That was a massive change in the business, and we had to be bold. We felt we had to be bold to do these things. We were condensing generations of work into a very small period of time. We have a constant rolling 5-year plan using history, aims and targets and trying to predict the future, but we couldn't predict COVID, which has affected us hugely. We have holiday cottages now, and they were absolutely stumped. Now, the follow-on is we've got 3 children. The eldest is 24, the youngest is 21. They've all nearly completed master's degrees in business. That's where we've pushed them into, not straight into agriculture like I did, but bang into business. The middle one, Sarah, is now doing a master's in opportunities, logistics and business at Newcastle University. That's where they're coming to. And they all want to come back and bring something to the business in the future. And they've got very strong views about what they want to do. Our son Charlie is very keen on red meat. Our daughter Alice is very, very keen on animal health. It doesn't mean because you're a woman you can't be involved with agriculture. And that's the one big thing Charlie and I learn in a house of 3 women. You've got to bring your own passion to the business. And our view that agricultural skills can be bought in as well through farm consultants and agronomists. Farmers don't need to know anything. They shouldn't pretend to know everything. Buy the skills in. That's what the agronomists, etc., are for. And the skill is, I've lost track of my notes. So we'll just round up with that. We don't have to do everything all the time. Thank you very much. I've got to pass on to Mark Bridgman. So Mark, are you there?
I am, Johnny, thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. So I've been asked, like everybody else, to respond to Stephen's presentation and his notes. I just really wanted to draw out a few thoughts that I had to his work and a few ideas of my own as far as how we adopt. I farm up in Northumberland, and until recently was president of the CLA. So I think Stephen made some extremely good points around new opportunities. I certainly see that. If we think back 10, 15 years on our farms, we were, everything was about food production. Now, and if we look forward over the next 10 years, there are a whole load of new buyers, new demands on our land, whether it's environmental services for the government, through ELMS type schemes, or environmental services through private markets like carbon and biodiversity net gain. So more demands on our land, and that's an opportunity. I think we all need to increase our knowledge, and I liked his point about the open access and the importance of open access, going on courses like Johnny mentioned, and learning from others. I certainly personally find the best learning is actually going out and seeing what others are doing, because there is a lot change coming down the road. Stephen talked about the lack of profitability, and that's all very clear in DEFRA's statistics. And these are numbers we've seen before and cut in different ways. But this is a situation that's faced around in different parts of the world. I interestingly was looking at some statistics about the US a couple of weeks ago, where 80% of US farms, the majority of their income doesn't come from farming. So we need to understand in our own businesses, if the pure agricultural element isn't profitable, why is that not the case? And better really understand what it is that's holding us back, and how we can grow some of those other components on that bar chart, whether it's environmental delivery, where we know there'll be opportunities through the new markets I've mentioned, whether it's diversification. the percentage of income from diversification continues to rise. If you look across farmers, across the country, or income from off farm, and I'll touch on that in a second. The term family farm, I do slightly have a problem with, because I'm not quite sure if I look around, every farm that I know within 30 miles of me, which one isn't a family farm. I mean, it's a sort of political term to create an image in my mind. I think, whether it's a big farm or a small farm, pretty much all farms have got this sort of, a family component to it. So from my own point of view, I think the things that, farms need to do in order to adapt to the new agriculture, I think the first thing is to identify your strengths. Now, that's your own personal strengths, what you bring to that farming business, but also the business location. So, I'd love to run successful offices where I live, but that's pie in the sky given my location. But I'm in a popular tourist area, so I've got a competitive advantage there. And everyone around the country needs to look at what they can offer. And then, of course, the actual assets themselves, the soil, the climate. But I think sometimes I see farmers, and we've all been done this. We do what was done before, and we do what our neighbour does, rather than thinking about what in our own unique skills and assets can best deliver. Secondly, I think we all need to prepare for the future. So first element of that is understanding our strengths and weaknesses as a business and as individuals. But we need to follow where we're going, follow that DEFRA. Yes, it's complicated. There's vast numbers of new schemes coming forward from DEFRA, but make sure you're following their blog, their future farming blog, to understand what's coming. Talk to the membership organisations that Stephen alluded to. Read your Farmers Weekly and so on. So just seeing what's coming down the road. Personally, I think people should be embracing the environmental opportunities, even though ELMS isn't really available yet. It's only just going to start next year. Countryside stewardship is there, and the government have done things to streamline that, improve it. Payment rates are likely to increase. So embrace that, grab hold of that, because that is a real opportunity. And also, as far as that preparation, if you haven't already done a carbon audit, do a carbon audit. There's also a number of different tools, and yes, there's shortcomings with them, but we all need to do a carbon audit in our business to understand where the problems are within our business and where the opportunities are. We talked about learning from others. I think that is crucial. Traveling, potentially overseas, but around the country, go and see what other people are doing and learn what other people are doing, and be brave, try new things out. And the final point I would have is around collaboration. Yes, people talk about collaboration a lot, or it's very much the buzzword for environmental delivery, but it should also be in the farming side, within farming. Too often I just go to farms and see lots of shiny kit sitting there that's not really earning a living. And I think we all need to get our working our kit to work harder. We need to collaborate more with each other. And all of this stuff becomes more specialist and more expensive, and we need to play off each other and see where the opportunities are. If you've got a post banger and you know how to put a fence up, there is unsatiable demand for fencing as a result of the different schemes that are coming down the road. There's far too, not nearly enough. Find out what it is in your area where there's a shortage, and if you've got the skill set, and that's an opportunity to earn income off your holding, whether it's 50 acres or 5,000 acres, but using some of the skills and kit you have. And finally, there was talk about succession. Johnny talked about it and Stephen talked about it. What I've seen working best, some of the best examples I've seen when I've been lucky going around the country, is where next generation are empowered, where they're allocated some capital and empowered just to get on and try things out, rather than just doing what your mum tells you to do or your dad tells you to do within the business. Giving where other members of the family are given businesses to run, that's where I've seen it being most successful. So there's a few thoughts of my own and a few response to Stephen, and I'm now going to hand over to George, I think is the last of the panel, and to give his thoughts. George Dunn is Chief Executive of the Tenant Farmers Association. Thank you. Over to you, George.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to the company for the invitation to be with you today. And can I just take a moment just to pay tribute to Mark, because he has recently just stood down as the president of the Country Landed Business Association. And I have to say, he has been a tremendous advocate for the landlord sector, and he has engaged with our organization extremely well and positively. So thank you, Mark, for your time at the CLA, and I wish you well in your retirement. Stephen has suggested that we are entering the era of the new agriculture. I would want to disagree with him to the extent that I think that agriculture has always been about the production of food and fiber alongside the wider societal benefits that we want to see, including landscape, biodiversity, animal welfare, public access, clean air, clean water. You know, we could go on. And until our recent exit from the European Union, we have sealed that compact between farmers and society through the basic payment scheme, and obviously its predecessor schemes. And for many, as Stephen alluded to in his remarks, that has been the difference between profit and loss for many farm businesses who are doing the right thing by the landscape, by the biodiversity, by the animal welfare, and the other non-market benefits that Stephen talked about. However, we've all got to accept and realize that those payments are and were a very blunt tool, and they have created unintended consequences, not least through raising the price of inputs, particularly land, into the farming system. And what we're now moving forward to is not so much a new agriculture, but a new framework within which that agriculture has to operate. And that new compact between farmers and society, which will attempt to better match this idea of public payments and public goods. And the trick will be to make sure that we build that new framework as efficiently and effectively as possible. And I believe that an essential component of the work that we need to do is to address the market failures that exist alongside the direct incentivization of public goods. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, that means we need a systematic look around supply chain issues. And this was something which was debated within the Agriculture Act, which is now in place. And if you look at the recent report from Kite Consultants, the recent reset report, which said that we needed to see some flex upwards in consumer prices, and we needed to see a new normal in terms of consumer prices. Otherwise, as Kite put it, we will see the collapse of UK supply chains. Quite a stark thing for Kite to be saying. We've heard the Food and Drink Federation saying that the just-in-time system that consumers could expect to go into supermarkets or other retailers and find everything they want on any given day on those shelves, that system has gone forever, which is again a very stark reminder of where we are in supply chain. So we need to look at supply chain issues. We need to look at our international trade agreements. Now, there's been an awful lot of rhetoric around wanting to support British and wanting to support our standards. And Caroline does a tremendous amount of work in this area, and we applaud the work that Leaf does in terms of standards. But if we're going to import stuff that's coming below our standards, then that's simply going to undercut what we are doing here domestically. And we need to look at land occupation agreements. We need to look at the taxation framework within which decisions are made. And we need to look, obviously, at the new environmental land management scheme and the forthcoming sustainable farming scheme in Wales. And also, we need to look at how we are addressing our policy on climate change. And there is this sort of rush towards trees as being the solution. But farms themselves have a tremendous amount of natural capital that can really be a solution to climate change. So my assessment is that there isn't a new agriculture, there's an emerging new framework, and that there is a lack of necessary strategic thinking within government, particularly coming from DEFRA, which I think is failing to produce the necessary elements of the framework that we need to deliver a truly resilient and sustainable farming system. So we need to tackle all of these challenges together as a nation, rather than seeing us offshore our externalities in terms of animal welfare, carbon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So as we step into this new framework, we need to make sure that it's accessible by all farmers who are able to make a contribution regardless of size, location, as Mark referred to, or land occupation type. And we in the Tenant Farmers Association are very concerned, particularly for our members who are occupying on farm business tenancies, which, let's not forget, have the shortest terms, average just over 3 years, 90% of new tenancies less than 5 years, and some of the most restrictive terms as well. Let's think about common land, where we are looking at people who have had relationships with the government through the basic payment scheme, and now from day one have to be collegiate in everything that they do in order to get funding from the government for those wider issues. So we need to think about land occupation as well, and we need to make sure that everybody has a chance in this new framework to deliver the food and fiber and wider societal benefits that we know we all want to see. So that's my remarks on Stephen's report. I think I can hand back to the master, who I think has reappeared. So Master, can I come back to you to do the Q&A?
Thank you very much, George. Huge apologies to everybody. I launched into my welcome and introduction speech. I did it all, and then I had a little ping from Duncan saying I wasn't there. So I don't know what happened, but I think when the record came on, I went off. But everybody has said everything I was going to do so much better than I was. So thank you very much to our 5 speakers. Thank you, Stephen, for doing the slides, all very interesting, and for the panelists for commenting on them. So I wasn't really needed anyway, but I missed my glory moment. But thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to invite questions from the audience. Please put your question into the chat room, and then I will come to you at the right time and ask you to put your question and to the specific panelist you want it to go to. So I have got the very first question here, and this one is from Christine Grange. So Christine, we're going to come over to you for you to propose your question and to the panelists you wish to speak. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Master. My question is, what does the panel see as most likely to be the key to running a profitable family farm in the post-single farm payment environment?
And who would you like the question to go to? Anybody in particular?
Yes, I'd like that to go to Stephen, please.
Thank you. Stephen, please.
Thank you, Christine. So I think that the most important thing is to think with a business mindset, to think about what you want from the family farm, and to embrace the appropriate opportunities that are becoming available. But that also means something else, which I didn't really sort of allude to. That means letting go, probably, of some of the other things. So if you sort of take a look at the farm business and see that there are some things that are just perhaps not working so well, then maybe it's time to stop those things. I mean, this is easy to say, and I don't underestimate the issues surrounding this, but I think it is taking that business mindset, both from we need to replace profit that's being eroded by the reduction in the basic payment, but also this idea of control over your destiny as a family farm engaged in a business. So I think that is the single most important thing, rather than dictating, well, farms should do this or farms should do that. It will depend on where you are. I mean, we had an example of how Northumberland is not appropriate for office type conversions and so forth. So it will depend on your own personal circumstances and your own family objectives.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Would any of the other panelists like to add anything? Thank you, George.
Thank you, Christine, for your question. And obviously, I've already made the comment about the wider framework within which we're operating, and I want to see change within that. But I think for farm businesses themselves, my view would be the one thing that we can do is to have a relentless focus on margin. A relentless focus on margin is what we need. And what I'm a bit concerned about at the moment, when we're seeing some reasonably high commodity prices, people are looking at those commodity prices and saying things are okay, aren't they? But they're not seeing necessarily the cost side of the equation to the same extent, because costs are also pretty spicy too. And I fear that whilst we are saying in many circles that we're seeing people suggesting that we don't need Alan, we don't need government intervention, we don't need government support because prices are good, actually margins are still under pressure, and we need to have all sectors with a relentless focus on margin.
Thank you. Anyone else from the panel, please? Thank you, John. On mute.
Just reiterating exactly what everybody else has just said. But we've had the experience of doing exactly that. And actually, it's really quite humbling when you look at, I perceive myself as being a mixed farmer, and I could do anything really as well as anybody else. But actually, when we really screwed down onto the minutiae of cereals, the rest of the farm were propping that up. In our instance, we just could not produce wheat at the time for less than £130 a tonne. And so we just said, listen, arable land's at its top, we're going to get rid of it. We're going to move on and invest that money in elsewhere. And we took that money and invested it in holiday cottages and bought another farm. And actually, we've come out of that. It's made us unbelievably strong and resilient as a business, taking those big decisions.
Thank you. Mark, I believe you wanted to come in.
I think the point I was going to make probably been made, particularly by George, and the point about cost. If there's one thing to focus on, I would agree with that. And sort of linked to that, the tendency to always think of how big is that pile of grain in the shed, or how many lambs am I selling, isn't always the best way of looking at things. And actually doing less of something, if you can drive the cost down, it can often end up being profitable. What we all have to be very careful of is being busy fools, working incredibly hard to produce a huge volume and a very big top line, but it doesn't actually drop through to the bottom line. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd now like to go to Malcolm Hughes, please, for his question. Thank you, Malcolm.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And who is the question for, please?
This is to Stephen, I think, please. I've really got two questions and one statement, really. The first question is, how are we going to be able to monetize and participate in a fair system for carbon capture? And I think fair is the word I want to really query. Carbon capture on our farms, and as we change over to this regenerative farming. The second question is, are we going to be forced down the net zero route, and will this impact on land values? And then my statement really is, if we do carbon capture properly, I think the income we get from carbon might be worth more than crops and livestock on our farms. So they might actually then become a secondary market. And perhaps you could comment on that as well.
Thank you, Malcolm. Very interesting questions and points that you raise. In relation to the first one, how to monetize, I think. So I think essentially, there are two routes. That there's not much in the environmental land management proposals that I can see. There are some farm woodland things, but that's more about how you manage the woodland. And obviously we've had the woodland grant schemes in the past. So there's not that much at the moment that suggests that there'll be government support for tree planting, but that may change. The second source is the sort of things, and I don't want to sort of highlight forest carbon in particular. The reason that I know something about forest carbon is that net zero report, actually no, I deleted that slide so that you didn't see the net zero. There is a net zero in agriculture report that forest carbon and I and others were involved with. So I know a little bit more about what they do. And we've had students looking at, they've done projects looking at tree planting on family farms, essentially for their third-year project. So that seems to me to be a way that you can monetize carbon capture and storage and get advice on how to do it. You're getting people who want to, an oil company, for example, who want to offset carbon and forest carbon, facilitate the transfer of money through to the farms. There are political issues with this. The whole carbon offset thing is getting a little controversial, but that is one way of monetizing things. There is also commercial forestry as well, I guess, from a private perspective. So your second question was net zero and land prices. So I put an exclamation mark in my notes, and then I've put yes. So maybe I should just stop there. I think it depends how resolved we are in the UK with our relatively small contribution to global emissions to do something about moving towards net zero. If we are serious about that, and some of the targets are effectively enforced is too strong a word, but measures are put in place to achieve those tree planting targets under net zero ambitions, then I think it will have an effect on land prices in a positive way, particularly in more marginal areas where you don't have so much potential for agricultural production. It's not just trees as well, it's things like peatland and re-wetting and so forth. What are the implications there more widely? I mean, who knows what the implications are for food supply and food prices if we were to seriously move in this direction? It's really not considered sufficiently. And so your final points, so I'm afraid you might need to run through the final point again, Malcolm. But I mean, I think those were your two main questions. So maybe if I stop there.
Can I come back in again?
Yeah, sure.
So I wasn't really thinking about trees. I was thinking more about grassland and arable land, because if, for example, our arable land's got an organic matter of, say, 1.5%, we should be able to take it up to, say, 10%. And that's what organic matter, which will be able to store thousands and thousands of tons of carbon in our soil by doing that. That was really where my question was aimed at, not trees, because trees, I don't necessarily, I've got plenty of trees and I've planted loads of trees over the years, and I don't necessarily need to be planting more trees.
If I may comment, so in the work that we've been doing and the agri-environment literature review, I've learned a lot about soil organic carbon and what we can do to try and capture carbon in soils. Let us say that it is more controversial than capturing and storing carbon in trees. Now, I'm not an expert here. Now, if you're starting from let's call it degraded position and improving from, say, 1% to 10%, then clearly there's some carbon capture and storage there. But it's not that easy. Well, you do reach an equilibrium position where you can't increase the amount of organic carbon in the soil beyond that point. There are issues. Well, what if you then go and plow up that field and then there's a release of carbon through carbon dioxide? And all I will say is that it's not quite so obvious that you can get carbon capture through soils in the same way that you can through trees. We're back to this issue of uncertainty. If I do something, how certain am I? How certain are policymakers who might be paying me, or some carbon capture organization, market platform, how certain are we actually getting those benefits? It seems to me from the information I've been reading that that is less clear than some other methods, but I'm not an expert, so I should perhaps stop there.
Thank you. Mark, can we go over to you, please?
Cool. So just picking up on a couple of those things. On the soil point, I think Stephen's right. But it is where the real opportunity is for the farming community. The Committee on Climate Change specifically didn't look at soils because of the stuff that Stephen was talking to. It's complicated, it's not easy, it's less verifiable, and it's less permanent. However, that is where I think we need to be focused. And there is a group working on a soil carbon code, and I think that's where the opportunity is for the farming community. So the person who asked the question, I agree. So a couple of other things I think that are worth mentioning. There was a question about land value. I think it can go either way, depending on government policy. So right now, it is having a pretty dramatic effect on what I would call the sort of bottom end of the land value. So the more marginal sheep country, particularly north of the border, the amount of land that's being bought up to plant trees on, and it's driving up the price of land in a pretty dramatic way. Not in the sort of £7,000 to £10,000 arable ground, but in the more marginal ground, and that is having an effect. If we see, I mean, George Eustace just talked about, there was talk about a meat tax. What he really meant, and what he quantified it on Andrew Marr last week after COP, was a carbon tax. At some point, could we have a carbon tax at the border? Ultimately, that is what we would need to do if we really want to get to net zero, because otherwise we'll be doing good stuff here and we'll just import stuff that's produced far cheaper. If there wasn't a carbon tax at the border, and we had to get to net zero with all the costs that will add in our businesses, then that could have a negative effect on land values. So assuming the government structures it right, I would have said that carbon does provide a support on balance. And then the final point is just a note of caution. People were selling carbon for £3 or £4 a tonne a few years ago, and now selling it for £15, £20. What is the right price? Bill Gates reckons it's worth $200 a tonne, 150 quid or whatever. So just a note of caution. I think it's on an upward curve at the moment, but then in the very long term, technology might come along and help solve some of these problems, in which case the market will disappear. So it's a case of getting your timing right. Thank you.
Thank you. Caroline, please.
Just to add, I mean, there is a little saying, the second mouse gets the cheese. And so actually understanding better what this all looks like is going to be really important here. As Mark has alluded to, there's a lot of people that kind of went in for the gold rush and have had their fingers burnt. And I think what's going to be really important as an industry, we drive some baselining in there. It's essential that farmers start to look at footprints in terms of knowing what their carbon footprint is and how they can improve through efficiencies. I think it's going to be really important for government to start looking at some enabling legislation. At the moment, they're kind of standing well back from this. And, this is the financiers and bankers who are putting and potentially going to be making a lot of money out of all of this. And it's really important that we draw value, whether it's offsetting, insetting, and what is the value that farmers are going to have? How long have you sold it for? What have you sold? Can you improve it? What happens if you have a bad year, etc.? So there needs to be a huge amount of really serious work behind all of this. And I think the other thing, I totally agree with you in terms of the importance. This is about our capability to capture carbon within the soil and through improved farming systems, and that is not accounted for. And that is, we are the poorer because it isn't as an industry, but actually also we need to be very careful we don't get so obsessed about the net carbon zero that we lose sight of some of the other public goods around farming, particularly obviously nature, restoration, biodiversity, food, fibre, etc. And I think, you know, it is a single issue, and potentially we need to have, as you said, you know, we need a fair system, and we need to monetize this effectively, but it needs a huge amount of thinking behind that.
Thank you, Caroline. And George, please.
Yeah, very quickly, two quick points. I couldn't agree more with Malcolm. We need to have a greater focus on our soils and the ability for us to draw down more carbon into our soils. I think Stephen said that the jury is out on soils. I think actually the jury is out on trees. And when you look at the work that has been done recently about, you know, the wrong tree in the wrong place and the loss of trees, and whether the life cycle of trees, whether it is the most efficient way. You know, we have this fashionable headlong rush into tree planting as the solution to our climate issues, and we're blinded to the wider issues that we need to be looking at in terms of good soil management, hedgerows, etc., etc. So I think we do need to be doing a lot more on that front, and this speaks to the strategic approach that DEFRA isn't taking. You know, if you look at the farming rules for water implementation and the lack of ability to put organic matter into soils in the autumn, if you believe what the Environment Agency has got to say, you know, we are spoiling our opportunities to do stuff for carbon and soil by some of those non-strategic thinking. And on the values point, I've been very interested to see landlords like the Crown Estate, who saw agriculture as a vanilla investment, and they were selling estates like Filio for the past few years, now understanding the strategic value of those estates from a carbon and biodiversity perspective. Same too with the church commissioners, you know, who are looking at their estates in a way that they haven't done previously. And estates like the Duchy of Cornwall, who have always, you know, seen their farmland as a diverse opportunity for them, not just to earn income, but to do stuff for societal gain, is really important. So I think it's a key point here that landowners are seeing the value in that land from a carbon and biodiversity perspective.
Thank you, George. And can I now go over to Neil Patterson, please, to ask his question and who he'd like to direct his question to, please. Neil, are you still there? Have you gone?
I'm just, no, I'm still here. I'm just sorting out my mute button. I think my question really is to Stephen and to some of the other panel members. We've heard quite a lot this morning about business mindset and the need to have a business mindset when looking at the family farm, and a lot about succession. I just wondered, during the course of your research, how much resistance did you encounter in terms of succession planning? And because this can be a really bitter subject for younger farmers and turns a lot of younger farmers away from the industry. And just to the other panel members, what tips do you have to share with us about succession planning on the family farm?
Thank you, Neil. If perhaps I go first. In terms of we did a questionnaire, a small number of members of the Worshipful Company of Farmers, and then there was a follow-up telephone interview, effectively, sort of to expand points. So one of there are a number of topics that sort of came up a lot. One was we need better information. One was broadly things relating to the farm as a business, with different people sort of contributing different things depending on their own circumstances. And then another common theme was succession, and that's where this idea of roles came in. So there's one response, how do we get the family members to think that farming is more than mucking out the pigs, was somebody's comment. And so succession was part of that. And so it's seen as being very important. If the question is, are people thinking about that? In terms of the people that I've been talking to, yes, but very, very much so. Now, how you deal with it has been expressed in a range of ways, and it's perhaps for others to comment more. But the making roles clearer was one thing, in that younger people don't really sort of have a feel for what farming involves as a whole, and that things that you do in the office, for example, although this is easy to say, and sort of how do you get your kids to be interested in things in the office, but to just get a better understanding of the breadth of farming. And then I go back to the sort of business mindset as incorporating goals, but thinking about family goals. But one thing I hadn't really considered, and I think that is very relevant, is the idea of just giving people some capital and letting them have a go. And that was someone else's idea. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. And George, could you like to come in, please?
Yeah, some really quick points. Talk early. It's never too early to talk. Talk openly, share heart to heart, be really open in discussions around succession. Thirdly, listen carefully to what everybody is saying, because you may think you know what the plan is, but people may not want to be part of that plan. Listen carefully. Fourthly, plan well, and particularly in a tenanted environment, you need to involve your landlord and maybe the landlord's agent. So you need to plan for this as a long-term thing. And finally, what I would say from a very practical point of view is it's often women within the farm family that hold the key to really good succession discussions. They know where the bodies are in the family. They know where the stresses and strains are in the family, and they can see solutions that sometimes us blokes just don't see. So really involve the women in the farm family strongly in any discussions around succession. So that would be my top tips.
Thank you, George. Very sound. And John, over to you, please.
Again, sorry. I think George has been sitting in our kitchen and listening to our conversations. That's quite embarrassing, because what we tried to do is we've done it with the children from a very young age. They've grown with us through our business. I'm not saying we're hugely successful, but I love the fact that our children have gone on to do their own things and coming back with their own ideas. And we've constantly made agriculture, farming, look creative, dynamic, and passion. And have a huge passion about what we do. And I've encouraged our three children, Helen and I've encouraged, you ask the questions and you find your own answers, because through that, you're just broadening your minds all the time. And our eldest daughter, actually, I think George just touched on this, she did her dissertation on succession within agriculture as part of her degree. And she was thinking about it when she was 22, about where's mum and dad going with this? And it's being open and frank about them at all times.
Thank you. And Mark, please.
Well, I think I'd just add, it's sort of touched on already, but transparency, I think, is absolutely key. Being open, and because that succession discussion will evolve, but just being open and discussing it, and the earlier the better. Including people in meetings, whether it's meetings with the bank manager, whether it's meetings with the business partners and so on, so everyone's sort of in the loop. And then just reiterating the point I made earlier about empowering and giving people something that's their responsibility, rather than just being told what to do. And if that means allocating some capital or a part of the business, whether it's a product line or it's a one of the businesses, I think that's where I've seen it work most successfully elsewhere.
Thank you. And Caroline, please.
Just to very quickly add, I mean, it is never too early, which I think is perhaps one of the most important challenges. But I think we're in a situation where we have a lot of farms where it is already too late. And maybe that's one of the bigger challenges with all of this. How do you manage succession where actually, yes, it should have taken place 30, 40 years ago, 20 years ago, but actually there is a here and now situation, and particularly with government believing or perceiving that there may be an opportunity for encouraging people out of farming, then how do we successfully manage that? And I don't think we've effectively thought through all of this. And the use of good third-party intervention is probably going to be a critical part, because it's great what John's been doing in terms of sitting around the table with open and honest and transparent discussions. but actually that hasn't happened with so very many farms around the country, and we're now in a challenging situation.
Thank you. I think you've all given excellent succession advice, so thank you very much. I'd now like to go over to Rachel Howes, please. Is she there, Rachel?
I am indeed. Sorry, caught me on the hop.
Oh, yeah, hopping, you're on.
I'm here. Right, okay. I get to talk to quite a lot of farmers, and I really try to talk to lots of young farmers. I've got 2 young children, a 25 and a 21-year-old, and we've done just as you've done, John. We've always talked about the business. And we actually have business meetings with them, and it's fantastic. They understand the business, they understand why we need to do what we do and how we do it, etc. And we're forming our succession plan. But yesterday in particular, I spent some time with some students at a college in North Yorkshire. And they were so ambitious and they so wanted to be part of the industry. And it really revs you up. And then you hear them say, yeah, but Dad won't let me do that. Mum won't let me do that because Grandad won't let us do that. And you're thinking, my God, right, okay. And this is a reoccurring theme. I've spoken at colleges and they turn around and say, I'd love to do that, but Grandad won't let us. And I'm thinking, oh my God. I think there's that element, but also the element is as well that a lot of these students that we were speaking to yesterday did not see the point in getting any further education. And I was trying to explain to them that this business is getting really complicated, really, really complicated. It's so much more than it was in the past. And I think we've allowed our industry to be dumbed down to a degree. And I think, how do we as an industry raise the profile, raise that business element of the industry at ground level? Because we can all talk within our circles as we are doing now and hearing the same things and going, this is great, this is brilliant, this is what we need to be doing. How do we make it actually work on the ground with those students, those 25-year-olds, those young farmers that are moving on from young farmers into something else? How do we get those people and get them running in a business?
Thank you, Rachel.
What we did.
Who's the question for, please?
Absolutely anybody, because I'm just
like to take it on the panel, then, please? Mark, can you go?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I agree. I mean, I see that problem elsewhere. The sort of previous generations or grandparents, and that's why I just reiterate my point about what works best. And I suppose from an education, well, the education point separate, but as far as succession planning, showing examples of where it works best, of the next generation being given part of the business to run themselves, I think is most effective. And I'd agree on the education point. And I know, I mean, the industry, government is trying to do something about this within the institute to try and improve ongoing education.
Thank you. And Caroline, please.
I mean, I think the great thing about farming, not everybody in farming is a farmer. And often a younger generation kind of feels, oh, I have to be a farmer to be in the industry. And, we have a huge infrastructure that supports farming and that farming supports the vice versa. And actually, that's the real opportunity. And so I think for where we have seen certainly some of our leaf demonstration farms, and John is a great example, is actually where the children have gone off and pursued a different career, created and understood a new skill, which either they suddenly sort of think, yeah, no, I want to come back onto the farm and I can try and develop that skill on the farm, or actually, they wait till there is a huge amount of change. And I think, we had a discussion earlier about change, and change is really hard. It needs energy and it's really risky and we don't have certainty. And so from that point of view, it's being bold, understanding skills. And, there are a lot of people for which education is not the right route, and we mustn't forget that. And that's why agriculture is actually a really great career to move into, because it touches all the 5 senses. It creates an opportunity for people. We have a very high level of dyslexia within agriculture. And that's because actually the practical skills that many great farmers that we'll have is they will be good at looking after livestock or see and understand things that, you know, a hugely academic perspective would not see. So we need competency to be recognised as well as obviously skill. But in addition to that, we also need to recognise that actually it's bringing new skills onto the farm, and that's open conversations and it grows with respect. We have a huge and very, very changing atmosphere around, and you know, even the older generation that everybody says a real stick in the mud are not. You know, they see that resourcefulness that's needed for us to address climate change. I think we actually need to perhaps have different levels of conversation, because I think it's all starting to move very positively.
Thank you, Caroline. John, can we go to you very briefly, please, because I want to get one more question in. So if it could be a quick response, please.
Yeah, Rachel, hello. The one thing that Helen and I have said all the time is this is our dream. This is our dream. It's not necessarily our children's dream, and they don't have to take up the mantle after us. Be brave enough to go out there, but we'll try our hardest to set you up with whatever you want to do. Boom, boom.
Thank you, John. And Stephen, Phil, can I come over to you now, please, Stephen?
Yes, thank you, Master. Yes, our succession planning is moving on so well that Dad does the Zoom calls and the rest of them get on and generate the profit. But Caroline and Mark really emphasize the importance of embracing change, and the new generations are going to be very good at doing that. And in particular, they mentioned innovation and technology. Rates of innovation have slowed in Europe and the US, partly because of the precautionary principle. And it's interesting to see in China how the rate of innovation is speeding up so much. And gene editing here is a good example of innovation that we ought to be using. So how do we incentivize innovation, Mark and Caroline, and what role should government have in this?
Mark, please, or Caroline. Mark, are you ready? Thank you.
So Stephen's right on the innovation point. There's lots of studies that have done on this. Personally, I think the opportunity of leaving the EU and looking at gene editing, which is very distinctly very different from gene modification, gene editing, the new CRISPR technology, I think is very exciting. And I think that is an opportunity. What can government do? I think government can play a role in this. You know, we've got fantastic science in this country, and we just need to let those, you know, empower them to bring stuff forward. I think government can help when it comes to getting sort of getting research closer to the farm gate, if you like. So you know, there's a lot. You know, there's stuff moving, you know, all the time. Whether it's in it's not just in plant breeding, whether it's in machinery, whether it's in AI learning, whether it's in you know, technology generally. I think we're going to see over the next 10 years, you know, technology really helping our industry.
Just to add to that, Master, I mean, I think the great thing about innovation is there's an awful lot of it happening, but actually one of the big challenges is the management application of it. So there is often an expectation from those that have designed technology, a new technology or a new innovation, that, whoa, why aren't farmers taking this up? And it's because of the requirement of management support that's needed behind that. And that's something that's really key. So where government could help and where industry can help, such as obviously demonstration farms and through things like Leaf Park, is that opportunity to actually bring research and farmers much more closely together, because I think that's one of the big challenges. Totally agree with you, the opportunity of gene editing. It is not, and I think this has been the big challenges with GM and potentially with gene editing, is it's seen as the way to farm. It is one of the tools in the toolbox. And as we look to actually address climate change, to mitigate against some of the challenges that are increasingly happening, we need to have all the tools in the box. and we need to be able to make sure that we can utilize them effectively, because as we're kicking out chemicals as an example for pesticides and pest control, then we're bringing in biologicals, and we still don't know the impacts of some of those biologicals to the environment and things like that. So we've got to continue to get a balance of innovation, technology. The Innovate UK are putting a huge amount more money into innovation and research, and there's some new projects, particularly in food transformation. We still have access to what is now Horizon Europe. So funding is without a doubt critical, but it's also supporting the importance of management skills behind it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That's great. I'm afraid we've run out of time. I know my chaplain has a great question, but I'll have to get back to him myself and tell him that. So I thought it was all very interesting. We've had an open and frank question time, and as expected, varying opinions, which all added to the mix and the stimulation. I do hope that you managed to get your question answered and that you've had some positive feedback and lots to think about when you take your business forward. I'd like to thank Stephen for his executive summary and for all his work in putting it together. I know he's worked very hard on it, and I'm very grateful. So thank you very much, Stephen. The panel, Caroline, John, Mark and George. I have got you a great intro, but you really don't need it. We all know what you're about. So thank you very much indeed for your contribution. I know you're all busy people and time is a premium, and your considered thoughts and opinions have been extremely interesting, useful and appreciated by us all. Duncan, thank you for being in the engine room and keeping everything running smoothly. And I, for one, know that, as they always have, farmers will rise to the challenge as they navigate their way through the minefield. But I do hope everyone from government to social influencers will come to recognise and remember that the farmer needs to have a business that is profitable and economically sustainable if they're to feed the country and to be good custodians of the land. I would just like to thank all of you, especially all of those who've signed in for this session. I wish you all the very best in the future as you navigate the challenges ahead, and as farmers do, carry on farming and looking after the generations to come. Thank you very much indeed, and I hope you've all found it a useful session. Thank you.
Very much. Very good.
Thank you.